And good morning. Ted Gunderson here with Mrs. Nancy Chip Tatum. Hello, Nancy.
Hello, Ted.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
We got to start out with a hug.
Oh, that's good. That's always good.
Nancy, what a fascinating life you've had. Actually, it's more than that. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And how did you meet Chip Tatum?
I was a commercial real estate appraiser living in Georgia, and his, shall we say, day job was that of a real estate consultant down in Florida. So an accounting firm asked me to do a market study for a housing development that he was going to help do as part of his day job. So I was brought in as a consultant.
And where did this take place?
Down in Port St. Lucie, Florida.
And when?
1991, in June of 91.
And when did you get married?
We got married in March of 93.
Okay, so you knew him roughly 2 years.
Right.
Before you married him. And during that 2-year period, when he was courting you, I assume, did you know anything about him?
He told me that he, on occasion, flew for the government. And the only other thing he said was he promised me that life would never be dull with him.
And has it been dull?
It has not been dull.
Okay. So you got married.
We got married.
And up to that point, all you knew is he flew for the government.
Only on occasion. He
occasion.
Always had day jobs. I mean, he was always a real estate consultant or a mortgage broker or, you know, I mean, I thought he was like a normal person.
Well, he is normal, I think, isn't he?
I'm not sure.
Well, we're going to find out as we go further in this interview whether Chip Tatum is normal. And not to mention the follow-up interview with Chip Tatum. Okay, Nancy, you got married. And then what happened after you were married in regard to his, quote, flying for the government?
By 93, he wasn't, like, you know, disappearing and leaving me phone calls of take care of the children if something happens to me, which he had done when we were dating.
Wait a minute. Take care of the children and you just got married?
Well, he has...
Explain that.
He has children from a previous marriage, and he was concerned that they would not get his insurance money. And I would get calls. I think maybe twice he called me when I was still living in Atlanta, and he was living in Florida, saying, I have to leave. If anything happens to me, be sure that my children are taken care of.
Yeah, of course, I wanted to clarify that for the benefit of the audience. I knew
yes,
that.
I know.
These are children by previous marriage. Okay.
I told my roommate, if he wants to stop seeing me, he really shouldn't come up with these stories. He could just, say, hey, I don't want to see you anymore.
But knowing Chip, he told you everything about himself except his, quote, flying for the government.
That's correct.
And did he continue to, quote, fly for the government after you married him?
Well, he didn't do any disappearing acts, so I really can't answer that. I'm really not sure. I believe he worked for them through 92. And then in 93, after we got married, no, he didn't seem to disappear much, except when they would occasionally come to arrest him as a piece of harassment. Okay,
we'll get into the arrest a little later on. And so at what point were you aware that Chip worked for the company?
Not until after his arrest in 95. He was sitting in a federal detention center, and I went to visit him, and after he was there a while and realized that they were starting to harass me and come after me, did he decide, I assume, to start telling me what was really going on and who he really was.
Now, Nancy, he's arrested, and he still doesn't tell you then what's going on. He tells you later on after he's arrested and in jail. What did he tell you about why he was arrested at the time?
I really don't remember. I think it was more just a lot of questions and from my side of it, and he was pretty much just trying to keep me calm and saying, I didn't do what they're saying I did, and things are going to work out, and just kind of keeping it on an even keel for me.
So in other words, but you did know what the charges were.
Yes, the original charges that they arrested him on out in Colorado, which I later found that he had agreed to these charges with Oliver North and Felix Rodriguez, were that wire fraud, because he had brought some money in from an account into Colorado, and then the man changed his mind and wanted his money back or something. But
so those were the original charges, but you had no idea that he was personally involved in this at the time this supposedly occurred, right?
Right.
And so you visit him in jail, and what does he tell you? He finally opens up to you. He can't turn down those pretty blue eyes, right? Okay.
He slowly starts telling me who he is, and it's about a year before I realize how high up in the echelon that he was, in the agency that he was, and that he would actually have meetings with George Bush and Oliver North himself and all the other people.
Prior to his arrest, that is.
Yes, prior to 92.
After his arrest, nobody claimed him.
No, they weren't real wild about that. But so he does it. He did it very well because he started me very slowly so that I could, absorb everything as we were going.
And so then what happened?
While he was in prison, they kept harassing me on charges down in Florida and making me drive from Colorado to Florida back and forth to see prosecutors and to see evidence and, trying to say that I had done something illegal and that he had done yet something else that was illegal and, push us into some sort of pleading to put us both away.
So you realized that you were a target at that point. Mm-hmm. And Chip obviously realized you were a target.
Right.
And what happened after that? Did Chip come forward then or not?
Well, no, he came forward with me. As we progressed, he was continually having visitors in prison from the people like the National Security Council and the Defense Intelligence Agency, trying to get him to turn over documents that he had obtained when he took me down to Honduras about 2 weeks prior to his arrest, which I thought he was just showing me the country. And apparently he had gone to pick up copies of some documents that a Honduran official was holding for him, which I had no clue about. And so as this whole scenario progressed, he began to have me go find these copies of these documents that he had hidden, and we began getting his information out to the press and to the public as much as we could.
Now, from talking to Chip, and I've spent quite a bit of time with him,
Mm-hmm.
Like I've had him on my radio talk show, like
right.
26 hours at a time. Twice, not once, but twice. Chip and I've had like 50 hours of interviews together.
Right.
And we're going to do a little 90-minute tape in a few minutes. From talking to Chip, he really kept you in the dark deliberately,
right.
Because he didn't want you to be a victim of the harassment and of the problems that the government, because of their power and strength and so forth, can throw at you and unleash on you. But at this point, from talking to Chip, he said, hey, I've had enough. I'll keep my mouth shut, but when you pick on my wife, that's it.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, that really is the way it happened, I think. Too, as an officer, intelligence officer, he was legally bound not to say anything to anyone. And so he also had the legal problem there, where there were a lot of things he couldn't tell me until he got before a federal judge with his information in the Classified Information Procedures Act once we were in trial. And then as the judge, looked at the information and said, well, this isn't classified and it's not relevant, then he could really open up to me and really tell me more of what things meant and what was going on. So I sort of had to work in the blind and trust him there for about a year or so.
Which you did, as any wonderful, beautiful wife would do, right? Well, not anyone, but most of them, many of them, hopefully some of them.
Hopefully. But I worry that there are a lot of spook spouses out there that don't know they're spook spouses, and they're totally confused.
Well, I'm sure of that. Now, you knew that he couldn't tell you everything. Did you feel he's told you everything now, up until now?
No. And I hope he doesn't. We pretty much work on a need-to-know basis. If it's something that's going to affect me personally or us personally, that's fine. Otherwise, I just trust him to do what he thinks is best for us.
So Chip's still a good soldier, basically.
Oh, yes.
And a very loyal American.
Very.
A great American.
Yes.
Okay, he's a hero as far as I'm concerned.
Me too.
Yes. And this trip to Honduras, that was very interesting. You didn't realize at the time that Chip had his insurance papers hidden.
That's correct.
And the insurance papers had to do with him staying alive.
Right.
Because if he gives up the insurance papers, Chip's probably bye-bye, right?
That's right. We had gone to various islands, the Bay Islands in Honduras, and he kept saying, oh, these are beautiful islands, you have to see these, and we would go from one to another. And at one point he said, have you noticed that we're being followed? And I'm going, yeah, right, okay, it's this spook thing again, you know, that he's trying to tell me about. And we really were, and this pretty brazen guy that Chip recognized from the past was talking to us on the airplane, but he was hopping from island to island with us. And I believe that the time Chip went to get the copies of the documents was one evening, which is really, at the time I thought it was sort of unusual for him, because I said, well, I think I'm going to go take a swim, and he said, well, I'm going to go down to the casino, and this was on the on the mainland. And we usually didn't do that. You know, we usually do things together. And I said, well, okay, that's fine. And he was sort of late coming in that night. And, of course, I didn't think anything about it, you know, other than, you know, usually we do things together. But
And so he retrieved the documents. You brought them back to the United States, I assume. And you probably had them scattered around the world besides that, knowing Chip. And at that point, had you been charged with a crime? Chip had been charged with a crime, right?
Well, no, not at that point. Well, he had elsewhere. Apparently in '89 he began giving the company a hard time because of the things they were asking him to do, and so in retaliation and trying to keep him in line, they would always throw legal problems his way, and he would just deal with each one as it came along. But 2 weeks after we got back from Honduras was when he was arrested by the FBI in Colorado. And they gave me back about $30 and sent me on my way, and pretty much said that if I come around and bother them too much, they would find charges against me. They would, you know, that they hadn't decided yet whether or not to start accusing me of something.
The FBI told you this?
That's correct. They were not very nice people, I'm sorry to say.
Well,
knowing your background.
I was with the old FBI. This is the new FBI.
I understand.
Nancy, you mean they gave you $30 and said get lost?
Yes.
How about your property, your assets, your bank account?
They seized everything that we had. We were actually in the process of moving down to Florida because they had been pursuing us down here, and we thought, okay, it's time to come back and you know, get this straightened out. And so everything we had was in a Ryder truck, which scared everybody because it was just after the Oklahoma bombing, and everyone was kind of concerned it was a Ryder. But they seized all of our property that was conveniently packed for them, and they kept that about 3 weeks. I had 2 cars to deal with, and they had given me about $30 to exist on because we had our own companies and we had shut those down, so I had no income coming in at all.
And this is when you relied on your family, I guess, to come through and help you out.
Right. I waited about a week, I guess, staying with some friends before I even contacted my family because, you know, as this thing progressed and as he began to tell me who he was, it was like, my family's not going to believe this. I'm not sure where I'm going to go. But I began relying more and more on them and telling them more and more what was going on.
And at this point, Chip's arrested and in jail. You're visiting him occasionally. He's being visited by people from the company and defense
right.
and so forth, and government officials. And what was the next step after that? What happened after that?
Well, eventually I came down to Florida to stay because of the charges that they were putting against me as well. And he had already concluded his agreement with North and Felix Rodriguez by pleading to this supposed crime in Colorado, and then he found that they were pursuing me. So the federal government gave Chip a little diesel therapy, and after about 6 weeks or more on the road, they finally got him transported down to Tampa, Florida, where we were both officially charged.
And so diesel therapy, let's explain that. Diesel therapy, folks, is where they put a prisoner on a truck. Usually, I assume it's through diesel fuel, but probably not, and just transport him around the country and just to keep him out of circulation.
Right. They were
it's a technique that they use.
They were very concerned that someone would get to Chip to talk to them. to some media and let the media know what was going on. We found it real interesting, though. When we came back from Honduras, we spent the night in Miami. We flew back into Miami and spent the night, and had gotten a rental car. And Chip had left the rental car at the hotel unlocked, and his briefcase in the car with his car keys in it. And that night, that car was broken into, and the briefcase stolen with the car keys in it. And we went ahead the next following day and flew back to Colorado, and I had a set of car keys, so we just got in the car and went home in Colorado. Well, when the night he was arrested and the FBI, I should say, accosted me, which is what I feel was done, they body searched me. I had no clue what they were looking for, and they searched me. They searched my car, his car, and as they were searching my car, which I had a Wagoneer, a Jeep Wagoneer for Colorado, and it had the back seat that folds down, so there's no way anything can get under that seat. This female FBI agent suddenly pops her head up and holds up Chip's keys that were taken in Miami, Florida, and says, "Oh, look what I found under the back seat. Have you been missing these keys?"
Well, now, of course, in Miami, Florida, it was an illegal search, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we have FBI agents committing burglary.
That's correct.
And the keys end up being stolen in Florida and end up in Colorado.
That's correct.
And that's interstate transportation of stolen keys, right?
That's right. I'm sure there's 5 years associated with that.
Yes, we have to identify the people that drove those keys from Florida to Colorado, right?
That's correct.
And then we will file criminal charges on them.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Chip's arrested. He still's not telling you all.
Right.
And at what point do they arrest you? At what point? Wait a minute. Chip's arrested. They're still not telling you all. At what point do they arrest you, Nancy?
It was, it was about 6 or 8 months later. All along I'm getting demands that I must go meet with prosecutors. I'm having information thrown at me that you signed this and you said that and your husband did this. And I'm told that my husband is saying, that I have done illegal things and that I cannot testify against him, but he can testify against me. And actually, obviously, I've committed a crime. I'm just in denial and don't recall it.
Who's interviewing you, FBI?
No, that was my defense attorney. That was
wait a minute.
That was my court-appointed attorney.
I was going to say court-appointed. Do you think he works for the other side?
No, surely not. Just because
where does he get his paycheck?
Yeah, just because his check comes from the same pool. So this goes on, and I guess it was about September of '95 that they finally actually indict me, and I don't recall all of the legal problems, but they actually got ahead of themselves and appointed me an attorney before they were allowed to. And
because they knew what was coming down, that's why.
Yeah, I guess so. So in about September, I believe it was, of '95, they finally actually indicted us. And
wait, indicted you and Chip? He'd already been indicted, hadn't he?
Not on this charge, no. They would not give him bond.
Well, what was this charge?
Well, it was interesting because we were charged together, and he asked me at one point to check with the computers in the Hillsborough County Jail where he was being held as to what charges he was being held on. And his charges were listed as treason, which was the threat from some of the people he had visits with in the middle of the night at the jail. Some of the NSC people had come in and said that he would be charged with treason. So while the court records read that we were both being charged at that time with embezzlement, he actually, on the computer in the jail, was being charged with treason.
Treason, punishable by death.
Or life in prison.
Or life in prison, right. So they charged both of you with this additional charge. And what happened after that?
We got some publicity on it. Again, dealing in the dark, he asked me to get a reporter that covers federal cases in Hillsborough County to talk to him and to tell him what was going on. And sure enough, we finally found one out of the several papers down there that would do that. And he found that the treason charge was sitting there. And as soon as we got publicity and got it in the papers, I kept checking with the with the police officers at Hillsborough County, and they were quite upset with me because every time I would go to visit Chip, I would say, I want to know what the computer says my husband's being charged with. They said, lady, it doesn't change. And I would say, well, just look it up for me. I don't care. And sure enough, one day it was back to the original charge of embezzlement, and the treason charge was gone.
Now, Hillsborough County is in Florida.
Yes, in Tampa, Florida.
And Tampa. And at this point, is Chip back in Florida himself physically at the jail?
Yes.
And you're there also.
And I'm there also. I have to say, people need to be aware how horrible our judicial system and our U.S. Marshals treat the prisoners. Now, Chip was diagnosed with claustrophobia by a government psychiatrist when he was being held in the federal detention center in Colorado. He was given medication to help keep his blood pressure down should he have an attack, because he could go into a stroke situation or a heart attack. And the U.S. Marshals were given his medication upon his retrieval from that facility to transport him. And they would not give it to him. And they, in fact, not only had him shackled from his hands and his ankles to his waist, but they then shackled him to the lavatory in a small Saberliner, and that was to the floor of it, and that wasn't small enough, so they put boxes in there as well. So it was pretty much a torture trip. And they would move him from facility. I think he's been in every federal facility in this country and some county ones, just getting from point A to point B. It was a real 6 weeks of torture for him.
So he was transported for 6 weeks from Colorado to Florida.
Yes.
And that's your diesel therapy that we mentioned
Right.
earlier. And what they do, as I understand, folks, is I've never been in that position, but I've been told by some other political prisoners that they go from county jail to county jail and unload the truck at night or the van, take them out, put them in the local facilities, bring them back out, and move on to another town, who knows how far away, right?
Right, and of course the problem there are a lot of problems associated with that. One for the families is you don't know where your loved one is. They, because of the way the phone systems are, and they have to have the people on the outside typically have to put commissary money in for them to be able to make phone calls. Although some systems have collect calls, you can't hear from them because phones are on only at a certain time. Some places like Atlanta are in continual lockdown, and so you will go for days or weeks not even knowing where your loved one is, if someone has murdered them in the middle of the night or not.
Not to mention the fact that they're not available to their legal advisor.
That's
their
correct.
court-appointed U.S. government-paid attorney.
That's correct.
I don't know if that's important enough or not to mention, but if they have a decent attorney or their own attorney, the attorney can't even get to them.
That's right. That's right. You don't know where they are to get to them. And, you know, they move them so frequently in the hours that they move them, it's just impossible.
So, okay, you're charged at this point?
Yes. So I'm charged and I'm put on a bond, which is pretty unheard of, which was an indication to Chip, I think, you know, that they weren't after me too awfully bad. They wanted me to harass him, but, you know, they weren't pushing it quite as badly as I think they could have.
You're too smart for that.
He might be.
That, they wanted you to harass him. Actually, what they wanted you to do was influence him into keeping his mouth shut and not talking, right?
Yeah, they were hoping that I would wimp out and that I would insist that he give them what they want so that I wouldn't have to go through this. But, you know, I was just raised that you don't tell stories, and I was not going to lie to particularly a federal judge and say I did something I didn't do because someone wanted me to.
Now, did you go in front of the courts at this point? No, they were interviewing you on the side, trying to get you to talk, and your court-appointed attorney was saying you need to tell all, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Was he telling you to go in and try to influence Chip?
Well, basically, yeah. I mean, they were trying to make it look like, well, see, the punishment for the crime they were charging us was 30 years imprisonment. And they were trying to say that if I didn't plead and he didn't plead, that we would both get 30 years in prison. And they try and scare the stew out of you is all they're trying to do.
Were you afraid?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a very scary thought. I wasn't sure I'd ever see Chip again without bars between us.
And so then Chip started talking. Chip had had enough when they arrested you. Now, from
Right.
Chip's story to me, he said that he was not going to open his mouth, even though he had his insurance papers in place, scattered around the world, But when they came after you, that was it for him, and he began talking, and he's telling all today.
Right.
This makes him a great American, in my opinion, definitely.
Absolutely. I started contacting radio shows. There's a great network out there of people that understand that we have political prisoners, and that a lot of problems exist in our judicial system. And we began getting some help that way. And he started doing radio shows from the county prison, which was really difficult because every 15 minutes they would cut him off, and if he was on an hour show, he'd have to call back every 15 minutes. But the other prisoners were really good about letting him cut back in line and keep going instead of, wanting their time at the phone.
Now, at this point, did Chip open up to you also?
Yes, as pretty much as the public was hearing things, I was hearing things as well, or if I was lucky, I'd hear it a day before they would. Pretty much at the same time.
You must have been one of his main listeners on the radio, I guess.
Yes, I really was. Unfortunately, I would, get sort of afraid for him because of some of the things he was saying. I would just go, oh, don't say that on the air. But he's the professional. He knows what he can and cannot do, and so I have to leave that up to him.
And how did the other prisoners treat Chip?
I think with a lot of respect after they got to know him. They, when he finally went to Jessup Federal Prison, which was in Jessup, Georgia, which was a camp, his last 6 months of confinement, he had a few incidents where people pretty much knew that he could take care of himself and leave him alone, and so they did.
In other words, physical confrontation.
Yeah, they do that, and I'm sure I haven't heard all the stories, and I would really rather not. I know that there were some confrontations in the county facilities as well, and he had to take care of himself, which he's done all his life, so he was fine.
And what about you? How do they treat you in the prison, with other prisoners?
Well, the only time I spent incarcerated, I did 1 month in a halfway house, and I did 5 months home confinement with an ankle bracelet where I was allowed only to go to work and then come home, and I lived with my parents, which helped. And when I was in the halfway house, they were very good to me, the other prisoners. They were a little envious that I only had 1 month to do. Most of them are 4 to 6 months in a halfway house, and but no one bothered me, and it was all right.
And how about the treatment by the government officials, the marshal's office, and so forth?
I have a real problem with all of that because in this country, I don't care what our Constitution says, you are treated as a guilty convict before you ever even go to court. And I just feel that that's so wrong. In fact, you have to go in and have a urinalysis done before you're let on bond, and they came back and said that mine was positive for drugs, and I've never had drugs in my life. And
so they fixed the test.
Yeah, and had my mother not been in court arguing with them, I mean, just being somewhat belligerent to them, they had to run the test 3 times before they got the accurate results. And the look on the faces of the men that were doing our investigation, who happened to have come over from DEA, one of them had, to work only on our case, he kept apologizing, and he kept saying, we're not trying to frame you for that. And I looked at him and said, well, that's unusual. You've tried for everything else. And but they finally got it understood that I did not have a positive drug test, and therefore I was granted bond.
Now, are charges pending against you now?
No, I'm a federal convict number 19074-018, actually. Right now we have the case in the appellate court. It's actually supposed to be heard on
you
Tuesday.
Or for Chip?
Both of them. When you have more than one defendant in a case, it always goes at the same time. So any motions, everything has to wait for both, or however many people that are involved.
Now, the charges that will be heard this coming Tuesday, which is, what's the date? We're
the 24th.
24th, okay, of 1998. That will be reviewed in regard to both of you.
Correct.
And what are those charges exactly at this point?
What they finally ended up convicting us of was conspiracy to tell a lie to a federal officer. What I did was actually witness Chip's signature on a document that was blank. He signed a blank document. Even in court, the document had never been filled in. Someone else witnessed his signature that was on a blank document. He was not prosecuted. So the appellate court, which is a 3-judge panel, will hear the case and either overturn it or, you know, say that time served or put Chip back in jail, or we don't know what will happen.
Okay, so the charges this coming Tuesday involve conspiracy to what? Commit fraud or?
Conspiracy to tell a lie.
To tell a lie.
To a federal officer.
To a federal officer. And they're pending against both of you. Does Chip have any other charges against him at this point?
No, I don't think he does. I think he's clear.
And you don't have any other charges against you?
No.
So you've basically both been convicted already then?
Right. This is the appellate decision. This is whether or not to overturn the district level. In our country, if you are being investigated or if you're arrested by the federal government, relax, you're going to jail for 2 years. That's about what it takes. If you're arrested, you'll sit in jail for at least a year. I've known people in as long as 2 years just to sign a plea. So, and then it will take another year to get to the appellate courts, which is where we're at now. So they could overturn it, and I could no longer be a felon.
And how about Chip? He could no longer be a felon either then?
No, because he signed the plea out in Colorado. His original agreement with Oliver North and Felix Rodriguez to discredit him, he will then have to go back and fight that if he can.
So he's got charges pending in Colorado and in Florida. He's been convicted in Florida, actually.
Yes, and he signed a plea in Colorado.
And he signed a plea in Colorado. So he still has to go back and fight that one then.
Yeah.
But you will be free at that point if they overturn it.
If they overturn it.
And if they don't overturn it, what happens? You go back to jail?
No, I've already served my time. That was my full sentence.
Don't bet on it.
So, well, I won't, believe me. I always watch over my shoulder.
How about Chip? Will he go back to jail? Diesel therapy, 6 weeks in a van?
Yeah.
With belly chains, handcuffs, and leg irons?
We don't know. It's always possible with him. When I don't hear from him when we're apart during the day, if he doesn't call me twice a day, he learns very quickly, and he calls me now during the day to let me know that no one has shot him in the back and no one has arrested
him.
Well,
he learns, right? He learned that from the government.
He's very educable.
Learned that from the government because they are disciplinarians and they're regimented, and so there was some good that did come out of Chip serving in the service.
Yes, I suppose.
Keeps his wife informed. Okay, so here we are. Chip's got charges against him pending in Colorado. Hopefully this will be overturned here. Mm-hmm. You'll be free. Chip won't have to worry about the local charges in Florida, mm-hmm. but it's still in front of the federal system, right?
Right.
What did the judge say when you and Chip were indicted and you went in to the court? In other words, how were you convicted? What was the? Tell us about the trial itself. Was it a jury trial?
It was a jury trial. We insisted on going to a jury, and which you always need to do. We were pretty shocked when they came back. What they did was have a gentleman by the name of retired Lieutenant Colonel Marine type Bill Lusinger testified against us. He testified that we were attempting to embezzle money, that we had conspired to do this, and to lie to federal officials. He did so. He happens to have been a convicted felon. He, in fact, did embezzle $80,000 from the government, and he was given 6 weeks on an ankle bracelet for his good work for the courts in getting a conviction against us. And he made $80,000, so I figured that's pretty good money from the government, $80,000 in 6 weeks of your time.
So what you're saying is that they used him to testify against you in order to lessen his sentence.
Right.
To show favoritism toward him because he'd already been convicted himself.
Right. And that's how our court system works. Whoever's the highest bidder for the better witnesses, I've heard numbers as high as $1 million of people that they have actually paid that amount to testify, or bringing convictions or sentences down from life to down to as low as 12 years for convicted felons if they will testify, and they will be more than happy. The prosecutors are more than happy to coach these witnesses as long as they need. In fact, My mother-in-law heard the prosecution in the witness room during a break tell Bill Lusinger, "You're not being hard enough on her. You need to change your testimony." And in fact, he testified...
Wait a minute, go over that one more time. Your mother-in-law told the individual?
No, my mother-in-law heard...
Oh, heard, okay.
The prosecutor...
Oh, I see. Okay.
Telling Bill Lusinger...
Okay, you're not being tough enough on her.
That he was not being tough enough on me.
Okay.
In fact, you don't have to worry about whether or not your case will get through a grand jury with an indictment, because all they do is just have the current witnesses testify to different things until it's good enough to convict you. Lusinger testified twice before 2 grand juries because the first grand jury would not indict us. If you compare that testimony, the transcript, to the transcript of the next testimony he did before the grand jury, it was a lot different.
Did Chip's background and his past activities on behalf of the government and his patriotic duties as an American working for the agency, whether patriotic or not, but in his eyes it was patriotic at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He was serving his country. Did that ever come out during the trial?
The only time that I recall that it came out was during sentencing, when the judge said that he would give Chip the middle of the road, which was 33 months, rather than, I think he could have given him another 10 months in addition to that or something. It came out during the SEPA hearing, which was held behind closed doors, which is what Chip was required legally to do, which is Classified Information Procedures Act. He had to physically file a motion saying that he had classified information that related to this case. And when we did go behind closed doors with the judge and with our attorneys, the judge said, well, it's irrelevant who you are, what you did, that you had contact with George Bush or Oliver North or any motivations behind this persecution. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. And it's not classified.
But what's SEPA?
SEPA are the letters CIPA for Classified Information Procedures Act. And that was the motion that he had to file to bring this information out before the judge, to make the judge listen to the information. So
the judge heard it, but the jury didn't hear it.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, it's only good for the judge. It's not good enough for the jury.
That's right. And I was really amazed. I always thought a judge was a judge and that he would say, well, that is, you can't do that, or Mr. Attorney, Mr. Prosecuting Attorney, you don't have what you need here, or you're going under the wrong law. You shouldn't try to be trying to prosecute these people under this law. That a judge is a referee. That's all a judge is. He gives no legal advice. He doesn't tell these prosecutors that they're totally out in left field.
He's supposed to.
Boy, he doesn't. He absolutely does not.
So you did not have a fair judge either?
Absolutely not.
Did not have, you're not treated properly by the marshals?
No.
You were harassed by the federal government from top to bottom. Mm-hmm. The FBI agents were not even kind to you, were they?
No, they were very rude people. They were very rude people.
Did not treat you with the respect that you deserved, I'm sure.
Well, and continued to try to intimidate me. And in fact, in the court, we both had public defenders.
I was going to ask you if you had separate attorneys. You had to.
You have to have separate attorneys.
You have conflict of interest otherwise. Go ahead.
That's right. And wives need to know as well that if their husband is on the inside and only he has been charged, you have no legal right to have any information coming from your husband's attorney. And that's a real problem, because if your husband is on the inside trying to get information to the attorney and they can't contact the attorney by phone because he's never in his office, and your husband gives you information to give to the attorney, that attorney does not have to take that information from you. He doesn't even have to talk to you on the phone. And these public defenders can be quite rude about that and not work with you trying to find justice or help your spouse. They simply say, I'm sorry, I don't have time. I don't even have to talk to you. Get out of my face. And that is what they will do. But in court, Chip had a list of 80 witnesses and his attorney did not interview
Which
any.
Court now? This is
in federal court here in Florida.
Okay, this is the trial for both of you.
This is the trial for both of us. Chip had 80 witnesses.
You were tried together?
Yes. His attorney did not call one witness. He had not interviewed one witness, and in fact, he had only seen Chip 3 times since Chip had come to Florida before trial. 3 times.
What's his attorney's name?
That attorney was Tom Hanlon.
Tom Hanlon, where does he live?
I think he's Tom Hanlon Jr., in fact. And
Tom Hanlon Jr., where does he live?
He's down in Tampa, Florida.
Tampa, Florida. Is he practicing law privately or strictly a public defender all the time?
He is both. He is a lot of them get on this list where they have private clients and they also work for the public defender's office. He's terrible, and he's very rude. He thinks that he knows everything, but he does absolutely nothing for his clients.
Let's go back now. A couple of questions I want to go back to, situations I want to go back to with questions. Okay. How about the judges and other attorneys who you feel mistreated you and Chip? Let's name their names and say where they're from.
The attorney that told me that I was in denial was a man by the name of David Weisbrod. And
Weisbrod?
Mm-hmm,
Spell that, will you please?
I'm not sure I still can. Wiesbrod, I believe.
And it's a man?
It's a man. He is in the Tampa area. He is also a private/public defender, works both. And the problem, too, is on the federal side that you get people that are trained pretty much in plea agreements, and then you have trial attorneys. And we've come to the conclusion that the courts always try to give you these attorneys that are good at coercing pleas out of you rather than spending the time and the money of letting you go to trial, because it's like $50,000 to get a trial done. And David, I believe, was one of those. And he was bound and determined that I would confess to something I did not do. I had to fire him when he had me sitting in front of the prosecutor's office waiting to go visit with the prosecutor, and he brought in someone that was a potential witness supposedly against us, and stood there and discussed my case in front of this person. When he would not talk about my case in front of my sister, he took me away and down the hall to discuss it. But when this potential witness to our case was sitting there, he comes up and talks to me about evidence that the prosecution has.
Is this in your appeal? Part of your appeal?
No, it's pretty irrelevant to that. But it was the reason that I wrote to the judge, and I explained to the judge that this had happened and that I wanted David fired and him replaced. And in court, the judge harassed me, and he was this was a magistrate.
Judge's name?
I don't remember that judge's name.
But it was in Tampa.
It was in Tampa. All this occurred in Tampa.
Federal court.
Federal court. And he thought that I was just being quite ornery, that it was terrible that I should say that an attorney did something that was really very unethical. How dare I say that? And obviously I was mistaken. And he sent David and I out of the room to try and mend our ways to see if we could work with each other.
That didn't last very long.
No, and when we came back, David agreed to file a motion saying that he would indeed withdraw from the case.
And how about others' names?
Well,
let's see. We got two court-appointed attorneys we've mentioned, where they're
right.
from. How about the FBI agents? You remember their names?
I know there was an Agent Lemon.
And he's where, in Denver?
He is in Denver. And he wasn't quite as rude as the other gentleman. However, the Agent Lemon was a Mormon, as are Chip's children being raised as Mormons, and he was quite flustered that we would have information on that faith in our car or have anything to do with it. He was quite insulted and decided that obviously that couldn't be, because we were obviously criminals because we had been investigated and so forth.
So you're criminals because you had Mormon literature in your car.
Well, no, he was insulted because he was a Mormon, and how could criminals have anything to do with any faith? It hurt his feelings, I think. So he was a little more rude, I think, because of that.
How about some of the other FBI agents in Denver? How about the female agent?
I don't recall her name. I only saw her twice, and I don't recall her name.
Nancy, when you were searched, They strip searched you?
Yes. That was why they brought the female in.
Did they cavity search you?
No.
Well, that's some relief anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about coming up now, more recent? How about the judges in the most recent cases?
The judge was Henry Adams Jr. He was the
Tampa?
judge in this case. Yes,
Tampa.
District level of Tampa.
Was he fair in his proceedings?
No, I didn't think so at all. But as I say, this was obviously my first time in a federal court. But I always thought that judges were there to see justice done. And my attorney actually even put forth a motion for the charges to be dropped against me because no real evidence had been brought forth. And he denied that. And I felt...
I mean, you had an attorney that actually came to your defense?
Well, only partially. His name is Dan Daly. And he really tried. Initially, he was quite gung-ho and quite confused as to why they would even attempt to put these charges against me after he saw the evidence. However, someone from the DIA approached him one night when he was having a libation in a local bar and told him that if he did not roll over and lose my case, that the DIA was investigating him and would find something to pin on him. And from that day forward, I got very little assistance from him.
Did he tell you this?
He told me, my sister, and Chip's family this while we were waiting for the verdict after the trial. Now, this should have caused a mistrial. He should have gone to the judge, and he should have said, I can't continue with this trial. I have been approached. It's a crime.
That is a mistrial.
And it's a
Guaranteed.
crime. It's a crime for someone to approach an attorney that's currently in trial and threaten them like that, intimidate them like that. But because he had been drinking, because the gentleman didn't give him his card, which, you know, the DIA, CIA, they don't give cards out, folks. They don't give their names out, not their right names. But he was afraid the judge would not believe him and he would look foolish. And heaven forbid an attorney look foolish in front of a federal judge. So it's much better that I take my chance serving 30 years than him looking foolish in front of a federal judge, don't you think?
Well, that's the way he thinks. I don't think I think that way. No, absolutely not.
So he pretty well sat down after that and really didn't do anything to help me. And he was approached like a month before the trial. So it was not during the trial, but it was about a month before the trial. He got his marching orders, and for some reason he felt that he had to tell us, but he waited until we were already waiting for the jury to come back before he told us that.
Nancy, let's see. We're up to the present date now, I think, on just about every facet of the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you want to add to this?
The only thing I could think to do to help people go through this, I've done just a little bit of research, and right now, every out of 100 people in this country are in prison. We are the most imprisoned country in the world at this time.
Wait a minute, 1 out of every 100 people?
Yes, are in either
the population?
state of this country, that's correct, are either in state or federal prison. By the year 2010, our Justice Department, our federal Justice Department, estimates that 1 in 20 will be in federal prison, and 1 in 5 will either be in state or federal prison. And the only thing I could think of to do to help people get through this was to put down not really our case and what happened to us, but information on how the system works from the point of being investigated up to the point of filing an appeal. Because there are a lot of nuances. There's so many things that people don't tell you. That this is not a level playing field. People are so shocked that Monica Lewinsky's mother has been taken in and made to testify against her in a grand jury. This happens every day in this country. They will intimidate your parents. Chip's parents were threatened that they would have their door broken in if the FBI or these investigators thought that they knew where Chip was and were not telling. Although Chip was in constant contact with them, they still made this threat to an elderly couple.
Was Chip a fugitive at this point?
No, we were never fugitives. We were always in touch via attorneys with the government as to where we were. From the beginning of the investigation in '92, they always knew where we were. They had phone numbers, telephone numbers, addresses, fax numbers, everything. But they still make these threats to people that don't know, and they will go around and they will tell your family, you are a criminal. Your sister is a criminal. Your brother is a criminal. They told our family that we had stolen millions of dollars.
Lies.
And that
it was only 100,000.
It wasn't. Yeah.
Just kidding, folks. Just kidding.
In fact, one of Chip's relatives laughed so hard at that because he says, that man never has any money. He couldn't have stolen $1 million.
And you still don't have money.
And we still don't have any money because the government takes everything. We sold all of our belongings just so that I could exist and so that I could send Chip money until I moved to Florida to face all these and got Chip down here. But anyway, you have to keep your sense of humor. You have to keep your health. I've spoken to women in the visiting rooms of federal prisons where they have said that the prosecutors will actually come to them and say, are you ready to divorce your husband? I don't know what it is. I don't know why. I know they go after people with the most assets. They go after people that have too much to say, like my husband. But they will do everything they can to break you physically, to break you emotionally, and to break up your family. And they're very, very good at it. So you really have to be prepared. And so I wrote like this little preparedness manual called Joining Club Fed. You too can be a member. You don't have to do anything. Trust me on that. But it's something that people really need to understand that if you've been raised in a Christian family and you've always been taught that you're honest with people and you tell them the truth, that's not enough. You have to deal on the level that the prosecutors deal with and that the investigators deal with, and that is not an honest, forthright level.
Nancy, how does somebody get a hold of Joining Club Fed, meaning joining the federal government?
Yes, joining our little clique.
Yes, okay.
They can call 800-201-7892 and order it from there.
Okay, that's great. That's let's repeat that now. 800-201-7892. 800-201-7892.
Right.
One more time, Chip. No, I'm just kidding. Chip was holding up a placard over there.
We have 2 cards.
Chip is the prop man in this video, okay? Folks, Chip is behind the camera over there. He's passing his little notes. Okay, this is a fabulous book, Nancy. Let's hope you sell a lot of them.
I just hope it helps.
Yes.
I just hope it helps somebody.
Well, let's hope it helps you and Chip. And
well, that would be a nice side effect.
We need to get the word out. We need to get the word out. Yes. And I heard about Chip last summer. This has been the summer of '97, and I put him on my radio show. And the best interviews I've ever had.
He's good.
Because he is the best.
He's got a good sense of humor, too.
At everything that he does.
Yes.
And I ended up putting him on for 2 hours. At the beginning, I thought, well, a 2-hour interview, right? Well, we had like 26 hours of interviews. Then I put him back on my show last week, my radio show. And we had another 2 weeks of interviews, I think it was. But anyway, by the way, folks, my radio show can be heard 8 to 10 a.m. Pacific time. And it's Galaxy One Transponder 17, 5.58 frequency. That's on satellite. Very shortly, I will be going over to shortwave out of Honduras, and that's through the Amerinet Broadcasting Company out of Tampa, Florida. Nancy, in closing, have we covered all the points? Have we touched all the bases?
I think so. I just think people, I don't like to be a doom and gloom person, and I don't want to scare a lot of people, but I really do think people need to be aware and prepared. You don't have to do anything in this country any longer to be prosecuted and to get a conviction against you. So, you just need to be prepared for it.
Okay, Nancy, thank you very much for your time, patience. You're a fabulous lady. Put up with that guy, okay? Actually, he's a fantastic, he's a great American. I have a great deal of admiration and respect for him. Can you imagine how many other people would stand up to the big government like he has and not back down?
Not many of them, and we do have about 380 political prisoners, men like Chip, he ran across a lot of old friends in prison, unfortunately, and our public needs to be aware of that.
Right. Well, thanks, Nancy.
Thank
great,
you.
great being with you.
Thank
Another
you. Oh, good.
Not once, but twice. Chip and I've had like 50 hours of interviews together.
Right.
And we're going to do a little 90-minute tape in a few minutes. From talking to Chip, he really kept you in the dark deliberately.
Right.
Because he didn't want you to be a victim of the harassment and of the problems that the government, because of their power and strength and so forth, can throw at you and unleash on you. But at this point, from talking to Chip, he said, hey, I've had enough. I'll keep my mouth shut, but when you pick on my wife, that's it. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that really is the way it happened, I think. Too, you know, as an officer, intelligence officer, he was legally bound not to say anything to anyone. And so he also had the legal problem there, where there were a lot of things he couldn't tell me until he got before a federal judge with his information in the Classified Information Procedures Act once we were in trial. And then as the judge, you know, looked at the information and said, well, this isn't classified and it's not relevant, then he could really open up to me and really tell me more of what things meant and what was going on. So I sort of had to work in the blind and trust him there for about a year or so.
Which you did, as any wonderful, beautiful wife would do, right? Well, not anyone, but most of them, many of them, hopefully some of them.
Hopefully. But I worry that there are a lot of spook spouses out there that don't know they're spook spouses, and they're totally confused.
Well, I'm sure of that. Now, you knew that he couldn't tell you everything. Did you feel he's told you everything now, up until now?
No. And I hope he doesn't. We pretty much work on a need-to-know basis. If it's something that's going to affect me personally or us personally, that's fine. Otherwise, I just trust him to do what he thinks is best for us.
So Chip's still a good soldier, basically.
Oh, yes.
And a very loyal American.
Very.
A great American. After his arrest, nobody claimed him.
No, they weren't real wild about that. But so he does it. He did it very well, because he started me very slowly so that I could, absorb everything as we were going.
And so then what happened?
While he was in prison, they kept harassing me on charges down in Florida and making me drive from Colorado to Florida back and forth to see prosecutors and to see evidence, and trying to say that I had done something illegal and that he had done yet something else that was illegal, and push us into some sort of pleading to put us both away.
So you realized that you were a target at that point, and Chip obviously realized you were a target.
Right.
And what happened after that? Did Chip come forward then, or not?
Well, no, he came forward with me. As we progressed, he was continually having visitors in prison from the people like the National Security Council and the Defense Intelligence Agency, trying to get him to turn over documents that he had obtained when he took me down to Honduras about 2 weeks prior to his arrest, which I thought he was just showing me the country. And apparently he had gone to pick up copies of some documents that a Honduran official was holding for him, which I had no clue about. And so as this whole scenario progressed, he began to have me go find these copies of these documents that he had hidden, and we began getting his information out to the press and to the public as much as we could.
Now, from talking to Chip, and I've spent quite a bit of time with him, like I've had him on my radio talk show, like
right.
26 hours at a time, twice. And good morning. Ted Gunderson here with Mrs. Nancy Chip Tatum. Hello, Nancy.
Hello, Ted.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
We got to start out with a hug.
Oh, that's good. That's always good.
Nancy, what a fascinating life you've had. Actually, it's more than that. It's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And how did you meet Chip Tatum?
I was a commercial real estate appraiser living in Georgia, and his, shall we say, day job was that of a real estate consultant down in Florida. So an accounting firm asked me to do a market study for a housing development that he was going to help do as part of his day job. So I was brought in as a consultant.
And where did this take place?
Down in Port St. Lucie, Florida.
And when?
1991, in June of 91.
And when did you get married?
We got married in March of 93.
Okay, so you knew him roughly 2 years?
Right.
Before you married him. And during that 2-year period, when he was courting you, I assume, did you know anything about him?
He told me that he, on occasion, flew for the government, and the only other thing he said was he promised me that life would never be dull with him.
And has it been dull?
It has not been dull.
Okay, so you got married.
We got married.
And up to that point, all you knew is he flew for the government.
Only on occasion. He
occasion.
Always had day jobs. I mean, he was always a real estate consultant or a mortgage broker or, you know, I mean, I thought he was like a normal person.
Well, he is normal, I think, isn't he?
I'm not sure.
Well, we're going to find out as we go further in this interview whether Chip Tatum is normal. And not to mention the follow-up interview with Chip Tatum. Okay, Nancy, you got married. And then what happened after you were married in regard to his, quote, flying for the government?
By 93, he wasn't, like, you know, disappearing and leaving me phone calls of take care of the children if something happens to me, which he had done when we were dating on occasion.
Wait a minute. Take care of the children and you just got married?
Well, he has...
Explain that.
He has children from a previous marriage, and he was concerned that they would not get his insurance money. And I would get calls. I think maybe twice he called me when I was still living in Atlanta, and he was living in Florida, saying, I have to leave. If anything happens to me, be sure that my children are taken care of.
Yeah, of course, I wanted to clarify that for the benefit of the audience. I knew
yes,
that.
I know.
These were children by previous marriage. Okay.
I told my roommate, if he wants to stop seeing me, he really shouldn't come up with these stories. He could just, say, hey, I don't want to see you anymore.
But knowing Chip, he told you everything about himself except his, quote, flying for the government.
That's correct.
And did he continue to, quote, fly for the government after you married him?
Well, he didn't do any disappearing acts, so I really can't answer that. I'm really not sure. I believe he worked for them through 92. And then in 93, after we got married, no, he didn't seem to disappear much, except when they would occasionally come to arrest him as a piece of harassment.
Okay, we'll get into the arrest a little later on. And so at what point were you aware that Chip worked for the company?
Not until after his arrest in 95. He was sitting in a federal detention center, and I went to visit him, and after he was there a while and realized that they were starting to harass me and come after me, did he decide, I assume, to start telling me what was really going on and who he really was.
Now, Nancy, he's arrested, and he still doesn't tell you then what's going on. He tells you later on after he's arrested and in jail. What did he tell you about why he was arrested at the time?
I really don't remember. I think it was more just a lot of questions and from my side of it, and he was pretty much just trying to keep me calm and saying, I didn't do what they're saying I did, and things are going to work out, and just kind of keeping it on an even keel for me.
So in other words, but you didn't know what the charges were.
Yes, the original charges that they arrested him on out in Colorado, which I later found that he had agreed to these charges with Oliver North and Felix Rodriguez, were wire fraud, because he had brought some money in from an account into Colorado, and then the man changed his mind and wanted his money back or something. But
so those were the original charges, but you had no idea that he was personally involved in this at the time this supposedly occurred, right?
Right.
And so you visit him in jail, and what does he tell you? He finally opens up to you. He can't turn down those pretty blue eyes, right? Okay.
He slowly starts telling me who he is, and it's about a year before I realize how high up in the echelon that he was, in the agency that he was, and that he would actually have meetings with George Bush and Oliver North himself and all the other people.
Prior to his arrest, that is.
Yes, prior to 92.